Looking at European equity market futures, Mark, they don't look all that inspiring, but we've had so much news and we're set to get a lot of data this week. It doesn't feel necessarily as if the market action is living up to all of the inputs. What are you making of the stock market performance right now?
Good morning, Anna. Well, it's precisely because of all those scheduled catalysts that people are reluctant to take too big bets, to add too much risk at the moment. I think ultimately I expect that equities will probably nudge a little bit higher this week. They will survive it. Sometimes the most hyped things are not the major catalysts we expect, precisely because they're so hyped. There's so much coverage spent on whether Michelle Bowman will descend today for the Fed, but I don't think the Fed really matters. By next week, it'll be forgotten. Ultimately, the Fed's path will be decided by when tariffs, or if they feed through to the real data, and when they feed through, how that impacts the consumer, how that impacts the economy. And it won't really matter whether we get an extra descent or not this month. So I don't think the Fed is the big driver. I think the bigger driver are probably earnings and data. And what's interesting on the earnings side is the US earnings season's been okay, relatively good. Europe's been a bit more disappointing, a bit more of a mixed picture. That's kind of favoring US stocks to outperform, but neither of them doing terribly. On the data side, what is interesting is that we're seeing consumers still continue to spend. That is the message out of retail sales. That is the message out of GDP data. And very rarely for me, because I normally dismiss GDP data as being too backward looking, I think today's GDP data out of the US really matters, because we're expecting a strong second quarter out of the US to kind of compensate for the weak first quarter that was purely a technical issue because of front loading of tariffs. If we don't get that, that'll really see yields tumble again long before we kind of expect to see, to find out whether Bowman is dissented or not.
Mark, I feel like one of the things that isn't being talked about as much, given some of the trade deals that have come through, are the trade deals that have not come through, like of Brazil, Mexico, Canada, all with a deadline coming on Friday. From an EM FX perspective, which we know you have a rich history in, how do you position for Friday?
You're absolutely right, Kriti, and I think there's still some real negative shocks to come through next week when people register which countries are going to suffer from a much higher rate, haven't got a deal, are being left behind a competitive advantage. I think this goes back to the point that EM is a much more diversified world now. You can't look at in one general scope. There are going to be some real winners and losers over the next month. August is going to be a more volatile month. Maybe not overall really terrible, but definitely volatile and differentiating between countries.
Mark, in 10 seconds, do I buy or sell the dollar if Bowman does descend?
I think the dollar continues to rally from here. It doesn't matter what Bowman does on the descent side. Over the next week or two, it bounces a bit more. Longer term, still dollar depreciation, but doesn't matter for the next couple of weeks. Overall, I think this is the fact is that there's time for a bit of a we're due a dollar bounce in the long-term downtrend.